Hello, I'm Reinessa with Rivalry, and I am here with Jack KBBQ Chen. Thanks for joining me today, Jack.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So, for those of the people who don't know, oh my gosh, you've held so many different roles in the scene, and I could sit here and list them off. But when people ask you what you do, what do you like to say? Like, how do you like to describe your role in the Dota scene right now?
Well, I guess this would have been a harder question to answer. I'd say a few months ago. I would have said, I was a translator who sometimes gets to be a panelist a little bit as well. But now it's a little bit more clear. I'm the team director at VGJ.Storm, and that means that on the Dota side of things right now, and just trying to get us to have a competitive team and maximize their performance, and kind of be in charge of the Dota side of things. That's what I currently do. That's my main focus right now. So
Mm-hmm.
the question is a little bit easier to know.
And so you mentioned you used to be the translator, analyst, and everything. And now I didn't know this about you, but I found this out completely unrelated before I even knew I was doing the interview. That you, back in 2012 and 2013, were involved in Dota as a writer with EG and NA Dota. How did all that get started?
So I went to grad school for journalism, and obviously at the time I was a lot younger, but it was like you kind of go with the things that you're interested in. So that was obviously Dota, which I played since like the mid 2000s. So I decided, hey, like why not try to put those things together and see if something can work out. And so there wasn't really anything like a serious like pursuit or path because I think the media in general in Dota and in esports is still very underdeveloped. It's not like
Mhm.
traditional sports at all. Obviously, it came up very quickly, and with traditional sports, like those things kind of grew together with the media. So you had newspapers covering it, and then big TV networks. That's not really the case in Dota or esports just yet, or maybe some other esports it is, but not Dota. So at the time, it was kind of more like a hobby with like, hey, maybe this can lead somewhere. So I enjoyed writing and I enjoyed Dota, so I kind of put that together. I covered some of EG's games at the time. I'd write like random articles for NA Dota or Neo Dota, and whether it was about TI or I remember writing something about like basketball and Dota, just like weird stuff, just based on my interest. So yeah, like that's what I did for a stretch at the time, and I didn't really expect it to lead anywhere, and it was very like it was all like on a volunteer basis, and that infrastructure wasn't really there yet, but it was fun. So.
Yeah. And it obviously did lead somewhere because if you fast forward a couple years, you were translating what was the Frankfurt Major, your first event? Yeah.
Uh, well, yeah. Before that, it was just about a month or two before that was ESL One New York, but I didn't get to do that much there because I had like one interview I think on stage with Aggressive, and I was super nervous at the time, and I think the way I asked him the question, you can probably still find the video somewhere. It's out there. And then I'm kind of just like I repeat the question to him, and then he looks at me, and like I think I was talking a little fast or unclear, and he's just like, "What?" And like the crowd that understood what he said, we just all started laughing. So that actually immediately took the tension and the edge off for me. I was just like, okay, I already like messed up a little bit with my first question. Like, how much worse can it get? And so yeah, but that wasn't there wasn't too much translation to be done at that event. It was mostly behind the scenes. So I would say the first time really on stage doing a lot of that stuff was Frankfurt.
Hmm. And so, how did that transition happen? How did you go from writing to being on stage? It's a pretty big leap in any scene.
Yeah, it was kind of as with a lot of things in esports, especially, and just about anything where things are kind of in the wild west phase and just fresh off the ground and stuff. I It was a matter of circumstance and opportunity. So one of my friends knew some people in the industry, and they needed someone at that event in New York to be a translator. And so one thing led to another. I remember Ken, a hotbit at the time, like kind of took a chance on me and brought me in as well to help out with that. So it was mostly behind the scenes stuff and helping the teams, but at the same time, there was a few on stage interviews. So that's how that came about. And then Ken at the time worked at ESL, and ESL also obviously ran that first Frankfurt major. So he took me with him to work on an EE documentary as well, and I guess he liked what I was doing, so he brought me along for Frankfurt, and yeah, that's how the ball got rolling, I guess.
So, do you consider that your big break, or is there another key instant or memory that you really feel like launched your career here?
Yeah, I guess that was it.
Hmm.
It was kind of weird to me because I'd watched TI myself, and like I'd seen Josh and other translators before, and to me it was like, oh, like this is pretty good. This person's, but I didn't like pay that much attention to it because to me it was like, it's a translator. As long as the person's kind of doing what they're doing right, like they're saying the things correctly, like that's about it, right? But I was a little bit surprised at Frankfurt that people seem to, really really weigh this or really be into it, or like really it really seemed to matter to them. So that was kind of a surprise to me, and I guess like based on the feedback from that, I got to go to other events as well. So I guess if you want to say like break, I guess that would be it. I didn't see it that way at the time because I didn't really have this sense of like, this stuff really matters a lot to people. It's kind of just like,
Mhm.
oh, I get to indulge my fanboy dreams. I get to be around players and talk to them and learn about the scene, and ended up working out and leading to other opportunities as well.
Yeah, so what led to you being an analyst? How did that start?
I think the first time was, I think it was actually on the Chinese panel
Mhm.
for the Manila major that year, I believe. And it was just kind of like, is there someone who knows something about the Western teams or talks to Western teams a little bit? Maybe you can come on and be on the Chinese panel a bit. So that's how it started. And then just over that year or so, like I kept getting other opportunities to do that. I think like the summit was like one other major example. The summit's format is like very loose in a sense, and they bring people once to give me a chance to go on there and talk a little bit about the Chinese teams and work with the Chinese players directly. So I think just through those kind of appearances, people seem to like it and seem to be really curious about what was happening in this whole other Dota culture on the other side of the world with its own huge fan base and its own like culture. So that I guess like that became valuable to people, and through that I got other opportunities to go on camera and be an analyst, and it worked out well for a bit at least.
And I know you've definitely been a favorite. People love you as an analyst. And even as a translator, you're talking about all the Reddit threads and everything. People were, it was, you fit very well, and you definitely brought something, that knowledge of the Chinese scene. So I'm very curious about that, because you said you went to school on the East Coast, here in America, and you're writing for NA Dota, but you're this insane expert on the Chinese scene. How does that happen?
I would say the vast majority. So when I first started being like a translator, it was obviously like I had to catch up a bit in terms of the language, the jargon. I loosely paid attention to some things that happened or some of the stories, just being like a fan of Dota and like through the work of like Josh, bringing a lot of interviews and stuff from the Chinese scene for the years before that.
Mhm.
So I had some idea, but I think the most of the groundwork for that was laid once I started going to events and talking to teams directly, and then finally just living in China for the past year. So after TI6, I basically spent most of the last from TI6 to TI7 in China. I lived in Shanghai, and in the Chinese scene, the Chinese esports scene has like one center, and that is Shanghai. And so that's where all the teams are. That's where everybody is. So I got to visit like pretty much all the teams' bases, get to know some of the players, and just through some of the managers, just get to really know the teams through that. So I think just that 1 year of like complete immersion in the scene,
Mhm.
both in terms of language and getting to know people. I think that's where a lot of that came from. Develop a lot of connections, meet a lot of people, and just that's basically continued to bear fruit since then.
And so it's very hard for kind of Western audiences to access the Chinese scene. And you've been very instrumental in kind of helping the rest of us follow along. What do you think needs to happen to kind of bridge that divide? Because it's still very clearly there.
I think a lot of it you're already seeing. Like even before myself, where I haven't been at that many events this year. There's always people who post these kind of memes and stories on Reddit, and always receives a lot of traction and a lot of attention at times. There's different layers of stuff, just like on Reddit. Like there's certain forums that are known more maybe for kind of gossip or very personal things. It's like I don't know. It's like like a tabloid type of attention to the scene. There's some that's more about kind of player news and concrete stuff. There's like daily publications that people come out with as well. I think most of those like haven't really been directly translated, though people might be interested in that. So it is still a bit tough just because it's so hard to separate rumor and like what people are saying from what's really going on. And the teams are, it's not easy to get access to them, and there's like a certain measure of trust. It's the same way with Western teams as well. Like
Mhm.
just being part of a team now, there's so many things that happen under the surface that are not just like things that you won't just see on Reddit or people won't really talk about. There's the trust between players that's very sacred as well, where people won't talk about a lot of these things because what incentive do you have to do that? You don't want to ruin the trust of other players or organizations. So I would say, I want to encourage the people who have been doing that kind of stuff and making these posts and sharing like memes or anything like that to keep doing that. And you see it on Reddit from time to time, and it's very entertaining for people. And I learn a lot from that as well.
It's kind of amusing to think about the fact that you're for the the Chinese teams, you're the Western expert, and then you're the West, you're kind of the Chinese expert. So I'm very curious, what's the flip side of that? Like in the Chinese scene, how much access do they kind of have to our side of things, to the West? Like how much do they pay attention? Is it the same divide, or are they better about keeping up than we are?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think they are a little better. I think. Well, this goes back. This has kind of cultural roots, I guess, where it's like there's always been like a very natural curiosity about like the other parts of the world, and especially in terms of if we really get deep into it, there's like socio-cultural things behind this too, like kind of like relative status and things like that, right? So it's like, oh, what's going on in the Western world is perceived differently usually by a Chinese person than what's happening in China may be perceived by someone who grew up here. So there's already like a natural curiosity when Western teams are doing well. Especially, there's a lot of curiosity. There's nicknames that come about. There's people who kind of specialize in bringing like stuff on Reddit or like Western culture or things that they hear or see back to China, and then that causes a lot of interest as well. And there's just a bigger scene in general. So I think, comparably speaking, it's all there. Like I think that. I would guess that the Chinese scene is probably more informed about the West and what's happening there than vice versa. Mm-hmm. But that's for different reasons too. I also think that generally speaking, like Western Dota, Western players or whoever else are more open about what's going on than some of the Chinese players and some of the Chinese orgs are. So that's another reason. But there's just so many things to untangle. I'm glad you asked that question. Made me think quite a bit as well.
Because it just, I think about what I know about Chinese teams as compared to Western, and it's absolutely nothing. I feel like I have no access to their scene at all. Other than basically what you tell us when you're on an analyst desk, which you haven't yet. You have an event coming up soon, right?
It's like you're telling me, Jack, step it up, man. I need to know more.
Yeah, we need VGJ, blogs from the house. Chinese scene reports.
Okay. Well, no, I got something else to work on now.
Yeah, it'll keep you busy. But actually, I would love to know about VGJ, because this is a whole different career move for you. You've done fiending the Chinese scene, and now you're back in NA to fiend some more.
I'm glad you described it as fiend. I'm glad that was the first description that came to mind. It's very accurate.
So how did this project start? Like, how did you choose, okay, being an analyst is great, being a translator is cool, but I want to, direct a team? Where did that happen?
So there's a lot of things that came into play here. I think, well, everyone knows one of the biggest piece of news in the Dota scene recently has been kind of Merlini stepping away, and in the LD to some extent as well. So some of the things that they're talking about, they also went through my head a little bit. Obviously they are like stone cold established tier 1 casters, and that's not me. I only really started getting into it last year, but I did feel some of the same things that Ben addressed as well. So for instance, I always say this, but there's a 6-week stretch from the Kiev Major to DreamHack to Star Ladder to Manila Masters to Zotac to the Summit, where I was in 3 major time zones for over the course like 5 or 6 weeks, and like I remember just by the time I got to the Summit in California, I was just so burnt out. And like at the time, anyone who was there like knows all I could really do at the time was basically play Dota to like de-stress and unwind. I was burnt out. I was really tired. I didn't sleep well. I didn't eat well. Like it was just really bad. So that was kind of one of the times where I really like had to dig deep a little bit and think about like, is this something that I could see myself doing for a long time? I haven't closed the book on that, of course, but at the time I was kind of like, if something else is out there, there's another opportunity, I'd have to be willing to explore. Also related to the talent part in making that decision is like, again, during that stretch, like I'm around teams, but it's almost like the same groups of people, and like not that much feels like it's changing besides like the Dota itself. So to me, it was like, how can I grow, like even in this role? How can I learn more about teams and players? How can I just learn more about the scene and get to see a different side of it? Whether that's business or competition. I've always been like, I would say pretty competitive, and from like I've always paid a lot of attention to like traditional sports. So it's like, how can is there some way that I can try to help a team win and just put myself into that? So I guess one thing led to another, and an opportunity came up over the summer through knowing Jeremy and his cousin, who is our CEO, and one thing led to another, and I ended up taking this opportunity, and there's a chance to, I think, grow in a different way, be challenged in a different way, which is very important, be able to compete and be able to learn a whole different side of Dota and in a way that would benefit everything else too, because I get to see kind of what the player and competitive aspect of is now up front. And whereas before it'd been, glimpses, like I live with wings for like a week or so during boot camp or whatever other situations came up. But now like you get to be a part of the process and like kind of grow that yourself. And I think that had a tremendous draw to me, and I'm glad that I made the decision.
So what surprised you about your new role? I'm sure you had expectations about what working with a team would be like, but what's been kind of the biggest, I did not expect this moment?
That's you're really good with these questions. I'm trying to think of something that would just be like this like eureka type of experience, that would just like encapsulate everything. Um, but even now, I'm thinking like, there's some things that I have to be careful about saying. But I think the main thing is, well, this is another thing that really speaks to the cultural difference between the Chinese scene and the Western scene. So in the Chinese scene, there's been a lot said about ACE. So basically, it's an organization that protects owners' interests, and so organization side decisions are often made like in like a more traditional sports model, where it's like what the team wants. So if it's transferring players, things like that. Um, the biggest difference with this in the Western scene is that the Western scene is basically entirely player driven. I've heard it described more than once as like when the reshuffle happens as like some Game of Thrones stuff. I think that's very accurate. Um, yeah, like everyone wants to be put in the best position to win as possible. It's very easy sometimes for people to, I think, lose faith in one another or want to, or believe that the grass is greener and that someone else can like kind of solve their problems or make everything fit. Usually, it's like the honeymoon period kind of wears off and you really see like what it's like to go into the grind, to go into battle with people. It's always like a difficult relationship. And so that's something that I think has become pretty clear, and just kind of that difference between, not saying that Chinese players don't do that or don't want to do that as well, but it's some real Game of Thrones stuff over here in the Western scene, and it's fun and and interesting at the same time, but it is a challenge.
And so I can't help but think that what you're saying is colored by you recently had a full roster change. You dropped your team. You've picked up a new one. Was that Game of Thrones-esque for you?
Um, I think, well, it was a mixture. It was a mixture of a lot of things. I want to credit like all the guys, especially Brian and Jaron, who came in on very short notice. Because and this ties to other things as well. Like when they joined the team, we had like a day or two to practice together before launching into 3 simultaneous qualifiers.
Mm-hmm.
And these qualifiers, when you're playing so many qualifiers or any at all, it's actually so emotionally draining. It's hard to describe. That's definitely something that's been like a big wake up call, because from the outside you're just like, oh, you're playing like a few extra games of Dota a day. Like, what's the big deal? You can already play like 10 to 14 or more regularly, right? But it really just takes so much out of you to when you're competing at that level, and when it means so much, like the difference between going to LAN or not. Like, it's such a defining part of a lot of players' careers, especially players who are on the rise or up and coming players. It's such a big confidence boost for them. So I want to credit them a lot for going through with that. It was just like I got a sense firsthand of like just how stressful and how tough it would be. And at the end of the day, we were one game away from a
Mm-hmm.
major. We took a 1-0 lead against Optic. I think was it for Bucharest? I might have PTSD and put it out of my memory already, but we were one game away, and sometimes that makes all the difference in the world. Like, in terms of confidence, in terms of faith, in terms of long-term belief, and well, I don't want to get too much into detail, but again, I want to credit everyone for being gritty and really fighting through that period of time that was really hard and, in a sense, unfair. They didn't get a chance to really practice and mesh, and unfair. It was unfair to them, but they handled it pretty well, and we competed, I would say, even better than expected at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but then, was it a Game of Thrones thing? I would say less so of that in this situation. I think it was just kind
Mm-hmm.
of like, can guys continue to play together? We had our mid player leave for Immortals, so during this time, so it was also a matter of like, would we be able to find a mid player after the roster lock who fit what we wanted, who fit what the players on the team wanted at the time as well? And those are very difficult things to solve, and so sometimes it doesn't work out, and everyone kind of presses the reset button a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And so your new roster, they've played one set of qualifiers with Dream League, and they were very close. It was certainly very close. But they haven't had to go through another qualifier gauntlet quite yet, but I assume they've got one coming up, right? You guys are about to boot camp in preparation.
Yeah, so the new players are coming in on Friday, and so that's 2 days from now. So we're excited, and then yeah, it's gonna be, they won't be thrown into such a crucible immediately, but they've played together for a little bit. So we'll be happy to have Snaking back, who was on the first edition of VGJ.Storm. I think he's a great competitor, and it's like he has like the real like drive and fire that you need out of someone on a team, and he's a veteran who's been there. So uh, yeah, I'm looking forward to that. We won't have to immediately play as many qualifiers as you said, but we have some things coming up. I think we're probably playing the Madness qualifier, and then I mean, most of the events between now and I think until almost MDL or whatever's after, like, have been decided already. So we have time to really just like practice and focus on that without going through like the extreme stress of qualifiers.
Because the qualifiers have been really intense for the past few months, I think. You said you saw it with kind of your first iteration of the team, and Valve has been making steps to improve stability, predictability, who's going to TI these things. Do you think that the current system is still too much? Like, do you think, because there's definitely player fatigue, and you can't just look at two major qualifiers stacked on top of each other and pick one. You can't turn down a major and pick the other. So what are your thoughts on just kind of how this current system is working with third party and everything, and what that means for kind of player mental stability in the future?
So I think there's a lot of things to be said there, including like our relative position within the scene. So we're a newer team. This is our first year as an org, and like we may not immediately have like an internationally elite team. So in that sense, with all the qualifiers being played, I think that can easily be seen as a good thing for us, because we get a lot of opportunities to prove ourselves, to gauge our progress. In maybe a year or so ago, like the qualifiers would be much more spread out or much more rare. And so in between, you don't really have like a great gauge of your progress and how things are going. So in that sense, I think it's good. I think like the constant competition is good. There's something to be said for it wears down on players, but at the same time, like it also begins to show you like, who is able to deal with that, and like whether your values or your organizational structure are good enough to help people deal with those situations. In terms of whether it's too much, I think one of the issues that's come up a bit is like in the Dota scene, everything revolves around TI. It is the Everest of esports, as I said, at TI itself. So that means that when you put the qualifying points directly in the hands of organizers, it just becomes, it gives them a lot of power and a lot of influence, because everything still revolves around TI, just the way it is, even though there's more prize money spread out throughout the year now. So that being the case, sometimes like the organizers, you see some of the conflicts that have been had, like they don't always have the most incentive to work together. There's overlap, and that can lead to things that are difficult for the teams, like when it's difficulty rescheduling things, or people not being able to move qualifiers around. If you're talking about 3 simultaneous qualifiers with like the same pool of teams, like you can only imagine they each want their games to be broadcasted. Some of them don't want to change because, and this makes sense, like they got the times locked in beforehand. So they're saying, oh, how come we planned a month or 2 in advance and you're stepping in now and you want to take our time? All of these are very understandable. I think that that's a potential issue with a kind of saturation at the same time of qualifiers. And then when they run those qualifiers, if there are a lot of events, they have to do it within a certain time window, just because you don't have other times available to play them with every team.
How do you think something like a league system, like say there was an NA league and the top performing team got to pick a tournament and then the second place team got to pick, do you think that would work, or do you think that leagues are not something that would work in the Dota scene?
Wow, another great question. We've talked about this internally, and it's been discussed a bit among some of the teams as well. So, as an example, ACE and in China, they did have a league, and they tied league finishes to spots in some of these tournaments, or as a qualifier spot. So that's one potential way to do it. I think this raises lots of questions, because then it's like, who organizes the league? Do you tie the spot to the team or to the players? Like, these are all issues that Valve has had to deal with themselves directly, but then you would have to deal with it on a team or organizational level, and then it becomes a question of, because you like Valve is going to be looking for the best teams possible and making it as objective as possible. So then the organizers and teams would have to do that as well. And the extension to this has been there's a lot of talk, at least earlier, about kind of who gets sanctioned to be minors and majors. And let's say the tournament's happening in Europe. Are there going to be the same number of spots? Like you may have one spot for a Chinese team, one spot for a South American team, and say 4 spots for European teams. And so when you tie like DPC points and things like that, you can very easily have regions saying, oh, we're frowned upon or being shown favoritism elsewhere, or it's much harder for us. These are all issues that have to be dealt with when you have like a league as well. And the other thing with the league is, again, you need to have regular matches. You need to have regular matches that mean something and are tied to something. But because there's a lot of player volatility, a lot of team volatility, and because you'd have to schedule, or again, around all these qualifiers that are happening in events, I think it can become quite difficult. So even in years past, I think Dream League had some issues with this, where it was like their league was usually just getting screwed over at times because teams had other obligations. I could totally see that still being the case if you had a league now. It would have to be I feel like it would have to be much more centrally organized when you bond like specific tournaments at set times to league slots. So it would have to both be flexible and be like rigid enough to keep people there. So it's a challenge, but it's something that people have discussed, and I wouldn't count it out at all.
And so, whether there's a league, whether there's a ton of qualifiers, no matter what, people are playing a ton. That's how you get better at Dota. And there's a lot of strain if you continue to not qualify, if you're losing the same teams, if you throw away an advantage. What do you personally do to help your team deal with that kind of mental stress? What's been your approach?
Oh, you want the trade secrets now?
Yeah, come on.
I think there's a couple things that I myself may be of some value in this regard. So one, I'm pretty sure everyone does this, but just being able to talk to your players one-on-one, and so that's separate from you're not worried about privacy. They can kind of just vent sometimes a little bit, and sometimes that helps. But also it's a matter of perspective, right? So I've been around. I spent a lot of time with wings, so I can say if you think that people are upset or tilted now, or this environment is getting a bit rough, I can just bring in a story from like the Wings team or something else where it's like, you don't know what it was like to be on that team, right? Or I can just go back and say, every Chinese team that has won TI, for instance, has had a lot of internal problems and has basically been on the cusp of disbanding, more or less. And so, I can tell them, hey, like, it's you don't have to be the best of friends. Like, it's not always going to be a kumbaya type of thing, but you can still compete at the very highest level, as long as you have you come back to the same values or the same goals. So I would say just kind of being that part amateur psychologist, part like a mental coach in a sense, and just sharing those experiences. I would say that's one part. The other part would be basically very rigid kind of scheduling and training, and figuring out how to maximize that, from personal health to sleep to training schedules. And the third part of that finally is kind of one of the unique parts of our organization, which is that one, we have Jeremy, who stepped in to kind of personally mentor and talk to the players and some of us and share his experiences competing, at such a high level. And also, as VGJ, we also have some partnership with our Chinese side team. So we're able to, for instance, in Macau, our OTK was able to come and coach us for a day or two and, kind of share like what he knew and what he learned. And so that stuff is always very helpful, and it's like a fresh perspective as well. And I think we're pretty much the only team right now who can really take advantage of that.
And so what do you think are the key components that an org needs to have now? Because it's not just 5 guys playing Dota anymore. There's a whole support staff. What would you say is orgs need to think more about doing, or need to invest more in, to kind of help these teams succeed?
So as I say this, there has to be a smile on my face, because and players aren't wrong about this. Like a lot of players could very easily reason or just think like, I don't need any of that stuff. I can win, give us a manager and he'll schedule things for us and take care of us. I think generally it's been agreed that a team needs that. In a sense, someone's going to take that burden off the players. Besides that, a lot of Dota it's so hard to separate things in Dota, where like right and wrong is so intertwined usually with like everyone else or everything else that's happening in the game. So it's very hard to isolate like individual parts of the Dota game. So we have a coach, Clairvoyance, who I think does a very good job of that, like finding ways to help people improve specific parts of their game. So that's something that I think this is not like a secret or anything, but like a lot of teams have coaches now, and coaches are playing a bigger role than ever. I have to say that for VGJ Thunder, ROTK plays a huge role in that team. and I'll probably talk about this more at Bucharest. But he does so much for that team. So we're talking about dedicated coaches who are not just people who are, say, taking a break from playing, but like actually go into the very details of player development and that to the fullest extent. I think you're seeing a lot of teams. For instance, with complexity or whatever, you also have someone who can be a chef, so nutrition is taken care of. For us, we have a personal trainer who is also Jeremy's personal trainer. And so, in terms of like fitness and posture, all those types of things, people are starting to account for that as well. So I think just different aspects of training, daily habits, and life, and then finally, some kind of content to help them promote themselves and take those kind of things off the player. And I think to kind of sum it all up, one of the things for this applies to players and everyone else. It's like sometimes the things that feel right or feel good are not what's best for you in the long run, right? So that's just like a basic human truism there, right? Like a lot of things that we want to do or feel like doing are not necessarily the best for us, and this can be true for players as well. But like it's like are you able to trust that the person doing that is a professional and like has cut their teeth or has their experience in it to be able to get you to do things that you wouldn't otherwise do? I think that's what the inevitable progression is for players and teams.
Mm-hmm. And so I can't help but associate the trope with this, but one of the things that popped into my head was, man, I wonder how he feels about being the team mom. Just, the one who's like, I don't know, that may not be the best choice for you. Has that been a weird role to kind of fill sometimes?
Yeah, I don't, well, let's just say I wouldn't make a very good mother, I think, but and I don't perform, a lot of some of the functions I do not necessarily have to do myself, or we have other support staff for it. But it's been interesting. I think one of the things that is like a factor there is kind of like I want to be able to be like sometimes like detached or kind of like perhaps even like an inspirational or informative presence outside of someone that you're kind of just used to and living with every day. And that's like just a basic human psychology thing. It's a challenge to live with people. So this model that we're bringing into the Western scene and trying to perfect and mold, it's a bit hard sometimes because anyone who's had a roommate or lived with someone, it's very different to have someone that you respect as either a friend or something like that, and versus when you have to live with them, like every little thing comes under the microscope. So I think that's been the most interesting part of that. So, yeah.
And so you're interacting so closely with these teams, and you said you spent time with Wings, you were in China for a year. You were obviously invested in other teams, but probably not like you're invested now. What does it feel like for you as this outside observer when they are playing and you can see that they're about to get second place and not qualify? What's that for you?
You have a smile, but you just asked me the most brutal question of this whole. I like it.
I know, I'm smiling because I know it's an awful question. You're that invested, and it's very hard, but it's something that people don't get to see. They see, a player lost, that must suck for the player, but they forget there's other people involved.
Yeah, it is nerve-wracking. Well, let me put it to you this way. So I've always been like a really big sports fan, and then when I was like a kid, like there's like a certain purity that you have of like sports fanness where you're just like you want everything to go perfectly, and like you basically just ride the highs and lows with your favorite teams and players. So there was a period of time where that went away. I want to say like maybe I grew out of it, or I stopped being so attached to like teams or players and things like that. And then it's come back, like just being in that part. So when we're watching a game, like every little lead change, every little fight, like every like if we just done this or that, it's all there. It is truly nerve-wracking, and it's hard to take stock of at the time. But really, like in terms of stress, in terms of like highs and lows, it's definitely like it's an all-consuming thing. Like victory and being able to win is so irreplaceable, and it's so important. And like how high everyone feels after even like winning a qualifier match or a game, it's a real rush, but it's also very stressful when things aren't going well.
It's a roller coaster.
Yeah.
And so now that you've had time to experience that, and then you've also had the analyst and the translating time, what has been, I don't want to say your favorite, right? Because you like everything for different reasons, but manager versus analyst, like where do you fall on that? Are you really happy about your choice? You're still going to be an analyst some of the time? I'm just curious, now that you've made this kind of bigger change, how you feel about it, your thoughts.
I some people have asked me if I regret my decision. There's an opportunity cost either way, honestly. I don't feel regret. It's not really something where I'm gonna weigh by like, oh well, if my team didn't win TI or if my team wasn't amazing, like did I feel like I wasted my time? Definitely not. I think both in terms of the connections and relationships and the learning about players and about like really trying to make a difference and help people out, like that stuff, and like the challenge of just competition, like that's always something that I'm going to find important, I think. So that part of it exists in both. I It's hard for me to answer this question. It's kind of like that's the part that I like about both. It's like feeling like you're experiencing something different, and that you're like growing and learning about something, and you're competing, and that there's something to look forward to. So in that sense, I would say that at the moment, I probably like the managerial aspect of that a little bit more, because I feel like I'm a part of building something. And so as a talent or as a caster, like there are other things, there are obviously like a lot of other perks and a lot of good things about it, but it's not quite the same. It's kind of like I'm not really sure, other than learning more about the game and being better about that and better how I present myself, where is like the sense of like building or creation or like challenge. Not to say that it's not a challenging or demanding job. It is. So yeah, I would say with that aspect of it, that's the part about the managing that's really stood out. And for the casting, well, let me put it to you this way: I've never been a person my whole life who's been, I would say, good on camera, or like, I think it all came as a pretty big surprise to me. Like in school, whenever we had like presentations, things like that, I would usually not be very good at it, or I wouldn't do it. I was like pretty shy. And so I think for me, when, whether it was like the pressure kind of that you feel, if I know I'm about to go out there and have to translate something live or even speak on camera, it was very nerve-wracking, especially at the start. And I think that my biggest takeaway from that I really enjoy each time is like, at some point you just have to go out and do it. Like it doesn't matter how you feel. Like you just go out and instincts just takes over, and you just do it. And I think that was very rewarding for me to be able to do that and feel that like I passed muster, that I did like a decent job at least, and that I was up for it. And so I think that was something that I would not have known without kind of experiencing the caster analyst part of it. It's like, can I really just go out and do this? So to each their own, I guess.
Well, and you've definitely done a lot in all of your different roles, and you really are building something at VGJ, which is really great to see. So I'm gonna transition away from all these Dota things that are wonderful and amazing. We've talked about them a lot. I have one last real question. What is the deal with The Last Jedi? You seem to have a personal vendetta against it.
You have found all the trigger points. I don't know what to do. I just go on a rant now or what? Or did you watch them? Did you watch it?
I haven't seen it actually. I'm a little behind on my Star Wars. But I've seen the tweets and I'm just like, man, he's got a lot of anger towards this movie. What's going on?
I think those are some of the angriest things that I've ever expressed, like in the Dota scene, right? I think it probably even surprised me. Wait. So I just want to get a feel for this, because this will determine how far I can go here. So, did you watch the original trilogy or the prequel? Like how Star Wars are you? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the episodes 3 through 6, I have repeated over and over and over again.
Okay. All right. Then now I know we're kind of on the same wavelength. Okay. All I'll say about Last Jedi is Okay. So here's one thing about episodes 3 through 6. Like, even the stuff that was like comedic relief or funny, like there weren't really gags, right? Mm-hmm. Like everything was pretty serious. Like the Empire was pretty serious. The Rebels, like everything was pretty serious. There were funny moments. They take quips and like take cracks at each other and stuff. But there wasn't like just outright comedic stuff just like thrown in there, right? So I think that is one of my biggest gripes with Last Jedi. It just felt like a not serious, like it felt like this grand space drama that we all grew up loving and just capturing our imagination had just become like sacrificed sometimes for cheap laughs. That's my biggest gripe with Last Jedi. I don't know how much detail I should get into here. You probably, when you see it yourself, I might have just ruined the movie for you, but you should see it yourself and you'll know what I'm talking about. So Yeah, and in the meantime, I will keep making angry tweets from time to time. I'll just wake up and get triggered, and then share it with the world. So
Well, thanks for this perspective. Well, if I have the same feeling, we can rant about it another time.
perfect. That's the follow up to this. We're just gonna both rant about Last Jedi.
Nice. We can, yeah, it'll be great. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk with me and share your story with Rivalry. Do you have any shout outs and let people know where they find you or anything you want to say?
Well, thanks for having me and taking the time to ask such probing and insightful questions. Shout out to Kevin, and look forward to working with you guys more down the road. For shouting out, I don't like the shouting out stuff because it's like I feel like if I actually start with one person, I have to get everyone, or I've like disrespected someone. I'm not gonna say shout out to everyone, but obviously so many people have made these things possible and have helped me on my journey, including obviously Merlini himself has been I would say a mentor to me and helpful to me as well. So sure, let's shout out to Ben and to the BTS crew. I missed them. Thank you so much, and yeah, hopefully we make more noise in the scene in this coming season.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Wow, thank you, Jack. This was KBBQ, and I'm Reinessa with Rivalry, and I hope you enjoyed hearing everything about Jack.